The morning light in Naomi Jacobs' kitchen was a deliberate gift. Low and golden, it crossed her countertop in a way she'd never quite found in her previous apartments. She stood there, mug in hand, savoring the quiet, the unhurried luxury of being just Naomi, for exactly 14 minutes before her phone inevitably rang. She was in her socks and a Howard University sweatshirt, both hands wrapped around her coffee. At 7:02 a.m., it started. A voice on the other end, apologetic, saying, "Dr. Jacobs, I'm so sorry to bother you on a Saturday." She was already reaching for her notebook. Her response immediate. "What's the case?" It was a pediatric consult, a 12-year-old whose attending wasn't comfortable with the presentation. By 7:18, she'd guided a second-year resident through it, listening to his exhale of relief like a man pulled from the bottom of a pool. She poured herself a second cup of coffee. This, she knew, was the texture of her life, a deliberate choice, like choosing house for its strong foundation rather than its easy stairs. Naomi Jacobs was 38 years old. She served as the chief of trauma surgery at Hargrove Memorial Hospital, a glass and limestone cathedral on the north end of the city, where people arrived broken and, if all went well, left whole. She'd held the chief position for 2 years, though she'd been the department's de facto engine for 5. She was the youngest chief of surgery Hargrove had ever seen, and the first Black woman. These facts were noted in her Wikipedia entry, which she'd never read, and in a framed feature from New England Medical Quarterly that her mother, Diane Jacobs, had hung in the hallway back in Baltimore without asking. Naomi didn't think of herself in those terms, youngest, first, because she'd spent too long getting here. The destination had become simply where she stood. She thought instead about what remained undone: 2 papers for peer review, a resident who was technically brilliant but lacked presence in the operating room, and a protocol she'd been pushing for 18 months on triage bias reduction that kept getting tabled in committee. There was always something. Her childhood in a narrow row house in West Baltimore was shaped by her mother, Diane Jacobs, a pharmacy technician with the organizational mind of an air traffic controller. Naomi spent her time in libraries, not lonely, but hungry for knowledge. Teachers called home not with complaints, but to ask what to do with her. She earned a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins, then medical school at Columbia, followed by a residency that nearly broke her. Not the hours or the blood or the suffering, but the exhaustion of being underestimated in a room full of people who held power over her future. One attending, Dr. Voss, had a habit of looking past her when she spoke. Naomi responded by becoming unfailingly excellent. She presented, she published, she made herself undeniable. Surrender simply wasn't a concept she'd inherited. Her mother hadn't raised a woman who surrendered. On this particular Saturday, the 3rd Saturday of October, Naomi had 3 items on her agenda: pick up dry cleaning, find a birthday gift for her colleague, Dr. Patricia Osei, who was turning 50 next Friday, and visit the farmer's market for heirloom tomatoes. She changed into dark jeans and cream-colored Henley, pulling her hair back with a scrunchie that had faded from burgundy to rose. She looked in the mirror for 4 seconds, long enough to confirm she was presentable, not long enough to care, then left her apartment, leaving her hospital ID badge behind. Today, she was nobody's chief. The farmer's market on Clement Street was a chaos Naomi found unexpectedly restorative. She moved slowly, pausing at a chili stand run by an elderly Vietnamese man who grew 23 varieties of chili and who had once given her dried chilies for soup. She bought her tomatoes, some dark kale, and a small jar of wild honey. With her tote bag growing heavier, she thought of nothing in particular, a rarity she tried not to examine too closely. At Chen's Cleaners, a place on the same corner since 1987, she noticed a woman struggling with a stroller, a toddler, and a sliding phone. Without thinking, Naomi caught the phone, handed it back, and steadied the stroller. "Oh, God, thank you," the woman said, looking exhausted but smiling. Naomi replied simply, "I've got it." The woman observed, "You have the calmest hands I've ever seen." Naomi looked at her long, unadorned fingers, chapped from constant washing. "Occupational requirement," she said. When asked what she did, Naomi stated, "Surgeon." The woman blinked. When the toddler hurled keys, Naomi swiftly retrieved them. "You're fast," the woman remarked. "Also a requirement," Naomi replied. She collected her dry cleaning and stepped out into the October air. The sky had clouded over, a pewter quality. She loaded her dark blue Volvo, then checked her phone out of habit. A text from Patricia, "Don't forget Friday, and don't you dare get me something practical." A notification from the hospital scheduling system she dismissed, and a voice memo she'd left herself about triage bias protocol notes. She pulled out of the parking spot. Later, she would remember. The light was green. She was certain of it. The light was green, and she was making a left turn onto Broad Avenue, and there had been nothing. The truck ran the red light at 62 miles per hour. It had been red for 4 full seconds before the truck entered the intersection. The driver, 23-year-old Tyler Hess, who would later blow a .14, never tapped the brakes. The F-250's front end crumpled the driver's side of Naomi's Volvo, sending it spinning 90 degrees into a traffic light pole. The impact lasted less than a second. What came after was silence, not an absence of sound. There was glass, metal, a car alarm, but the absence of Naomi's internal noise, the constant cognitive hum, the running calculation of what was needed, what was next. That silence went out like a light. In those first moments, she wasn't afraid. She was barely there. She felt her cheek against something cold, the deflating airbag, and a warmth on her left side that her surgeon's mind, operating below consciousness, identified as blood. Her left arm felt wrong, known the way things are known in dreams. She tried to speak, but only an unrecognizable sound came out. Around her, through the fractured window, voices arrived. Running feet. "Call 911," a woman's shocked cry. A child's frightened tears. Then a young man's horrified face appeared where the window had been, saying, "Ma'am, don't move. Help is coming." She didn't move. She drifted. In that drift, between sleep and waking, she found herself in her residency apartment, a studio on 171st Street, smelling of the Dominican restaurant below. She was 27, looking out at Manhattan, having just completed her first solo trauma surgery, a GSW to the chest, a 22-year-old male who had survived. She didn't know what to do with the feeling. Not triumph, but something akin to arrival. She had called her mother. "Mama." "Baby, what time is it?" "Late. I did it." "He made it." "Who made it?" "My patient. He made it, Mama." A pause, then her mother's voice softened, something Naomi rarely heard, saying, "I know you did, baby. I always knew you would." The siren grew louder. Paramedics reached her. She felt careful, trained hands, heard the authoritative calm of people working a scene, calling out vitals, assessing, stabilizing. She recognized the cadence. It was the language of her life, the rhythm she'd spent 15 years learning to lead. Now she was on the other side. She tried one more time to say something, her own name perhaps. "I am Dr. Naomi Jacobs, Chief of Trauma Surgery at Hargrove Memorial." But only breath came out. Someone said, "She's going in and out," and then the sky went away, replaced by the white ceiling of an ambulance. And then that too was gone. Naomi arrived at Mercy General at 11:47 a.m. Located on the city's south end, Mercy General was a Level 2 trauma center. It wasn't Hargrove Memorial, nor where Naomi would have chosen to spend her Saturday. The paramedics brought her in fast, calling out the handoff in clipped, practiced shorthand. "Female, approximate mid to late 30s, MVA, driver's side impact, GCS 7 on scene now fluctuating to 9, lack to left temporal, probable left radius fracture, decreased breath sounds left side, BP 90/60 and dropping, heart rate 120. The ER receiving team moved with efficient choreography. A nurse cut away Naomi's leather jacket. Another attached monitoring leads. The overhead lights were bright, clinical, bleaching all color. Dr. Mark Ellison stood at the foot of her gurney. He was 44, with the slightly rumpled authority of an ER attending whose confidence had calcified into certainty. He wasn't a bad doctor. He was technically competent, thorough on charts and evaluations, with framed degrees and a reputation for running a tight department. He had a daughter at Northwestern, a wife who organized charity galas, and a house in the suburbs. He coached youth soccer. He was also a man who had made snap judgments his entire life without ever examining the mechanism by which he made them. He looked at the woman on the gurney, black, late 30s, cut-open jeans and Henley, a canvas tote bag with farmer's market produce, a jar of honey, no purse, no ID, no insurance card found, a cracked, locked phone, a Howard University sweatshirt. She had a caked gash at her left temple, a swollen arm, labored breathing. A level 2 severity, he estimated, maybe a level 2+. "What do we have in Bay 1?" he asked, already moving. 41-year-old male, chest pain radiating, history of cardiac, stay with him. He glanced back at Naomi. To the nurse, Sandra, who would later remember this moment with precision, he said, "Get her stable. Run the standard panel. She can wait for imaging until we get the EKG suite cleared." As he moved toward Bay 1, he added, "And someone try to get an ID, check if she's got Medicaid." Sandra looked at the patient. Naomi's oxygen saturation read 91. Her blood pressure was 88/58 and trending wrong. Sandra said nothing. Not yet. Naomi existed in a place she had no words for. Not unconsciousness, but a country between waking and not. She felt the gurney, the starched hospital gown, the baseline hospital cold, 2 degrees too cool for human comfort, designed to check bacterial growth, a signal of a clinical environment. She'd never felt that cold as anything but neutral until now. Voices came and went like a radio signal in a tunnel. "Dandy panel. Still waiting on Bay 1. Someone check if she has..." She'd tried to surface, like pushing up through a lake. The light above was air and clarity, but the depth kept shifting. Sometimes she was almost there, sometimes she sank. She thought about her hands, a strange thought to find in this water. She remembered describing them to a shy medical student who asked, "What made a trauma surgeon?" She'd paused before answering. "You have to be able to hold 2 things at once, the emergency and the person, because they're not the same thing. The emergency wants you to see a mechanism of injury. The person wants you to see them. You've got to look at both at once. It takes both hands." She'd felt slightly embarrassed by the metaphor, as she always did when saying something she truly meant. She thought of her mother's hands. Smaller, roughened by pharmacy work, smelling of lavender lotion. Her mother had driven 3 hours to sit in the front row for her board certification, hands folded, eyes bright, pride and love, yes, but also a complex private grief for all the hours it had cost them both, the years of phone calls where Naomi had wept from exhaustion and her mother had always said, patient as stone, "You are where you are supposed to be, baby. Keep going." She had kept going. She thought, I should tell someone who I am. She thought, I can't speak. She thought, this is what it feels like. Then a voice cut through the haze, closer, insistent, a young voice with an edge, arguing, her pressure has dropped to 86. I need to escalate this. And she sank again. Her name was Dr. Simone Reyes, 29 years old, a second-year emergency medicine resident from a public hospital in East Oakland where patients were as sick as anywhere on Earth and with fewer resources. She was small, quick, dark-haired, with a pen-chewing habit and an impressive or exhausting quality of attention. She noticed the patient in Bay 4 immediately, not for any particular reason she could name, but from a clinical instinct, a sensitivity to the room's patterns, to what was being attended to and what was being left. She'd noticed Dr. Ellison had spent 11 seconds at the gurney before moving on. She'd noticed Sandra was told to run a standard panel, not to expedite. She'd noticed the patient's oxygen saturation trending down, 91, 90, 89, while the alarm threshold was set at 88. She pulled the intake form. No ID, no insurance, MVA. Then her eyes moved to the vitals trend, and something in her chest tightened. Sandra? She kept her voice even. When is imaging ordered for this patient? Sandra glanced toward Bay 1. Dr. Ellison said after the EKG suite clears. Her SAT is 89, and her pressure dropped 4 points in the last 8 minutes. I know. She could have a pneumothorax. She could have internal bleeding. We can't wait for... Dr. Reyes. Sandra's voice was not unkind. I know, but Dr. Ellison... I'm going to talk to Dr. Ellison. Simone went to Bay 1, where Ellison was calmly reviewing an EKG. She waited until he looked up. What is it, Reyes? The patient in Bay 4. I'm concerned about her respiratory status. Her SAT is 89 and dropping, and she has decreased breath sounds on the left. If she has a hemothorax, she's stable. Her blood pressure has dropped 8 points in the last 12 minutes, Dr. Ellison. That's not stable. That's a trend. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man reevaluating her intelligence. What's in Bay 1 right now? Chest pain, I know, but probable MI, Reyes. That's a time critical. So is internal bleeding. She said it quietly, holding his gaze. She needs a chest X-ray and a fast exam now. I'd like to order it. Something crossed his face, not anger, but its first cousin, a hierarchy being tested. She's a level 2, she's getting standard protocol. Standard protocol for this presentation should include imaging. A pause. Write the order, he finally said. I'll co-sign it. Thank you. She turned away before he could see her face, a mix of relief and something else, a foreboding. She felt she'd won a small battle, but perhaps arrived too late. She went back to Bay 4, ordered the imaging, and stood at the bedside, looking at the woman breathing shallowly. Quietly, Simone said, I see you. I'm going to take care of you. She didn't know why she said it. The patient couldn't hear her. Or perhaps she could.
The chest X-ray confirmed a left-sided hemothorax, blood compressing the lung, not immediately fatal, but immediately serious. The fast exam showed free fluid in the abdomen. Simone stared at the images, her stomach dropping in that particular way it dropped when she was right about something she desperately hoped to be wrong about. She walked fast to find Ellison. She placed the tablet before him. Bay 4, left hemothorax and free fluid in the abdomen. She needs a chest tube and she needs surgery consult immediately. He looked at the images for a long time. She watched the images do what they always do, override the comfortable story with a harder, more insistent truth. "Get the thoracic surgeon on call," he said, his voice even, "and get surgery down here." "Already called," she said. She had made the call while the images were still loading, because waiting was a luxury the patient in Bay 4 didn't have. He looked at her. "You called before I authorized?" Her SAT was at 87 by the time the images came back. She met his eyes. "I made the judgment that the delay created more risk than the protocol deviation." He could have reprimanded her. He could have made it a disciplinary moment. She saw him calculating it, but the images on the tablet were unambiguous. "Fine," he said. "Go." She went.
In the fragmented, unreliable space of Naomi's consciousness, she dreamed or remembered. She was in the OR at Hargrove, 3 a.m, operating on a young woman from a car accident. Her resident, Dr. Akindele, was across from her. Music played softly. She was working. She remembered the quality of her focus, not an absence of the outside world, but a narrowing of it. The decisive movements of her hands, her steady voice to her team. "I have been here before. Follow me." She thought about that woman, who had survived, who had trusted her utterly, without choice. "Here is my life. Do with it what you know." That was the weight of it, the part people outside her profession couldn't understand, the weight of being trusted with something irreplaceable. She thought, "I am on the other side of that now." She thought, "Someone is deciding how much my life is worth." She thought, "I know what that means." She surfaced briefly, saw ER lights, heard a monitor, felt competent hands on her chest, heard a voice saying, "Establishing a left chest tube. BP is climbing back, 88/62. And in the part of her that was still a surgeon, she thought, Good numbers. Keep going." And then the country between took her again. And she went.
It was Patricia Osei who found her. At 1:15 p.m., when Naomi hadn't answered 3 calls or 2 texts, Patricia called Hargrove, learning Naomi hadn't come in. Patricia, who knew Naomi to a granular degree, put on her coat. She drove to Naomi's apartment, then to the farmer's market. Driving back, she saw a cluster of police vehicles, accident markers, a bent traffic light pole, broken glass, and a dark blue Volvo crumpled like a tin can, its driver's side destroyed. Patricia sat in her car for 12 seconds, not breathing. Then she called 911, asking which hospital the victim had gone to. Mercy General, the dispatcher said. Naomi would have gone to Hargrove. If anyone had known to ask, Naomi would have gone to Hargrove. But no one had known to ask. Patricia drove to Mercy General. She came through the emergency department entrance at 1:47 p.m. wearing a cashmere coat and her Hargrove ID badge, Chief of Cardiology. She held it up at the nursing station with the decisive calm of a woman who'd spent 30 years not being ignored. I'm Dr. Patricia Osei from Hargrove Memorial. I'm looking for a patient who may have been brought in this morning from an MVA on Broad and Clement. Black woman, late 30s. I believe her name is Dr. Naomi Jacobs. She's the chief of trauma surgery at Hargrove. The nurse, Carlos, whose Saturday had been unremarkable until now, looked at her, then the badge, then back at her. "Let me get the attending," he said, his voice careful. He went to find Dr. Ellison.
Mark Ellison came out and saw Dr. Patricia Osei. She repeated calmly, "I'm looking for Dr. Naomi Jacobs, Chief of Trauma Surgery at Hargrove Memorial. I have reason to believe she was brought here this morning from an accident on Broad Avenue." He replied, "And you are?" "Dr. Patricia Osei, Chief of Cardiology, Hargrove Memorial." She showed the badge again. "We're colleagues. We're friends. What is her status?" "I'll need to confirm identity before I can share." "Then go confirm it, please." The word please carried the full weight of its opposite. He went to Bay 4. He looked at the patient. Really looked. The way you look when you know it's going to matter what you see. The woman on the gurney now had a chest tube, was on oxygen, her pressure stabilized, but still unconscious. He had no reason he could articulate for not having looked at her differently before. He would spend a long time, later, trying to find a reason he could live with. He wouldn't find one. He returned to the nursing station. Patricia Osei was still there, upright, unmovable. "We have a patient matching that description," he said. "She was in a motor vehicle accident. She's been stabilized. She's—" He almost said comfortable, but stopped. "She's receiving care. She's stable. I need to see her." "Are you family?" "I need to see her." Patricia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. He led her back. Patricia stood at her friend's bedside, silent for a long moment. She took in the chest tube, the monitors, the IVs, the sutured laceration on Naomi's temple, the swollen forearm. Her cardiologist's mind cataloged it all. Then her friend's heart looked at Naomi's face, softer in unconsciousness, stripped of professional armor. She pressed her lips together and held very still. "How long was she waiting for imaging?" Patricia asked. Ellison said nothing. "Who did her fast exam?" Ellison replied. "My resident identified. Who did her initial assessment?" A pause. Too long, said everything. Patricia looked at him. "I'd like to speak with your chief of medicine," she said. "Today." News in a hospital travels fast, altered with each telling, yet arriving at its essential truth intact. By 2:30 p.m., every nurse knew the unidentified woman in Bay 4 was Hargrove's chief of trauma surgery. By 3 p.m., the rumor reached administration. By 3:15, Dr. Raymond Holt, Mercy General's chief of medicine, was walking to the ER in his weekend clothes, his ID badge clipped to his collar, with the expression of a man whose acceptable Saturday had just been ruined. He found Patricia Osei in the family waiting room, hands folded. He introduced himself. She looked at him with the even, direct gaze of a woman, professionally courteous, only as long as it served a purpose. "Tell me everything you know about what happened to Dr. Jacobs this morning. And then I'll tell you what I know. And then we'll figure out what happens next." He sat down. She told him. Simone was writing notes when Sandra approached quietly. "You know the patient in Bay 4? I ordered her chest tube and the fast. She's the chief trauma surgeon at Hargrove. Simone looked at her. What? Chief of Trauma Surgery, Dr. Naomi Jacobs. Her colleague just came in. Apparently, she's kind of a known person. She's published, she's on the board of... Simone set down her pen. She thought about the woman on the gurney that morning. The vitals trending wrong, the imaging not ordered, herself saying, "I see you." She thought about what would have happened if she hadn't pushed, if she'd deferred, as she'd been tempted to do, as she'd been subtly trained to do. She thought, it shouldn't matter who she is. She thought, but it does. That's exactly the problem. Is she going to be okay? Surgery went well, Sandra said. They think she'll come around within the next hour. Simone nodded. She picked up her pen, then put it down. She opened her phone's notes app and began to write in precise chronological order everything she had observed since 11:47 that morning. She did it because she was a resident, and residents documented everything. She did it because she had a feeling that documentation was going to matter. She did it because someone had to be the one to say, "I saw what happened here."
Naomi came back to herself in increments. First, the sound of a ventilator. Second, pain, arriving location by location. Left temple, left arm, left chest. Third, the light. Softer than the ER, fluorescence at their lowest setting. This was not an emergency anymore. She opened her eyes to a hospital room ceiling. It oriented her. A hospital. She turned her head slowly, taking inventory. IV in her right hand, monitoring leads, pulse ox, left arm in a temporary brace. Through the window, a late afternoon October sky. A young Latinx nurse, Dr. Reyes, stood in the doorway, an expression of relief crossing her face as Naomi's eyes opened. "Dr. Jacobs, I'm Dr. Reyes. You're at Mercy General. You were in an accident this morning." Naomi worked her mouth. Her voice, rough and scraped feeling, emerged. "I know. How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck." A pause. "Was I hit by a truck?" "An F-250. She processed this. "How bad?" Dr. Reyes delivered the list with efficient specificity. Left hemothorax, drained, chest tube out now, free fluid in the abdomen, the bleeder was repaired in surgery, left radius fracture, non-displaced, splinted, laceration to the left temporal area, closed, concussion. You're going to be okay." Naomi listened with the same professional attention she'd give a handoff on one of her own patients, asking follow-up questions about anesthesia, the abdominal repair, film access. Dr. Reyes answered each one. Then quietly, she added, "Your colleague is here, Dr. Osei. She's been here for 2 hours." Naomi closed her eyes. "Patricia. Of course. Send her in. And Dr.
Reyes. She opened her eyes, looking at the resident properly. "Thank you." Simone Reyes, who had spent 3 years learning to be a doctor and longer learning to trust her instincts, felt something shift. "I just did my job," she said. Naomi looked at her steadily. "No," she said. "You did more than that. I need you to know I know the difference." Patricia came in and took Naomi's good hand in both of hers. For a while, neither spoke, a language of deep familiarity. Finally, Patricia said, "I should have called earlier." "Stop. If I had Patricia?" Naomi's voice was quiet, firm. "You came. That's what matters." A long beat. Patricia looked at their clasped hands. "There are some things you need to know about how this morning went. about how they handled you when you came in. Tell me." Patricia told her everything, pieced together from nursing notes, her conversation with Dr. Holt, and Simone Reyes's brief, devastating observations, shared 20 minutes earlier with careful honesty. Naomi lay still and listened. The monitors continued their commentary. The light through the window shifted. When Patricia finished, Naomi was quiet. Then she asked, "What was his name?" "Ellison." "What do you know about him?" 12 years at Mercy General, technically competent, no prior complaints, but..." Patricia paused. "But the prior complaints might not have been made. You know how that goes." Naomi knew how that went. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about a phrase she'd used in a conference presentation 3 years ago on implicit bias. The bias doesn't announce itself. It never comes in the door and says, "I am here, I am operating, I am deciding who matters." It comes in wearing the clothes of clinical judgment. It comes in wearing the clothes of resource allocation. It comes in looking, from a distance, almost exactly like medicine. She'd said that. She'd meant it. She'd thought she understood it. She understood it now in a different register. "I want to speak to his chief, Dr.
Holt is in the building. He's been asking to see you. I'll speak to him tomorrow, when I've had time to think." She turned her head on the pillow. "Right now, I want to know about the resident, Reyes, what she did." Patricia recounted Simone's early advocacy, her push for imaging, the chest tube, the careful documentation. "She's second year?" "Yes." Naomi was quiet. "Make sure someone knows," she said. "Make sure it's on record what she did." "Already done," Patricia said. "She did it herself." A small, exhausted sound escaped Naomi. Not quite a laugh. "Good girl," she said. Dr. Raymond Holt sat across from Naomi the next morning, in a hospital room that had been unnecessarily upgraded overnight. He was silver-haired, with the manner of a man who managed crises by avoiding his own discomfort. He didn't lead with an apology, but with, "I want to understand what happened here, from your perspective." Naomi appreciated that. She told him what she knew with composure, her voice and eyes steady. She described waking, hearing the gap between her needs and what was being ordered, the timeline Dr. Reyes shared, and an overheard phrase, "another uninsured case." Holt listened, writing nothing, which she took as a sign of seriousness. "I want to be clear about something," Naomi stated. "The issue is not that I wasn't immediately recognized as a physician. The issue is not my title or my hospital affiliation. The issue is what would have happened to someone who didn't have those things, because they were treated the same way I was treated. The only thing that changed is what happened after the truth came out. I understand. I don't think you do yet." Her tone was precise, not rude. "If I had died in that bay, if Dr. Reyes had not pushed for imaging, if the hemothorax had been missed, the story would have been unidentified patient, tragic outcome, standard protocol followed. Nobody's name would have mattered. What my title is doesn't change what your attending failed to do. It just makes it harder to explain away." Holt was quiet. "What would you like to see happen?" "A formal investigation. A thorough one, not a performance. Every patient Dr. Ellison has triaged in the last 2 years should be audited for patterns." She shifted, a cost to her left side she didn't let show. "And I want the system looked at, not just the individual. The system that made it easy for that individual to do what he did." "I can promise you the investigation," Holt said. "The audit I'll have to take to the board." "Then take it to the board." She looked at him. "And Dr. Reyes should be formally commended.
whatever form that takes. She is the only reason this conversation is happening." Holt nodded. He stood and met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dr. Jacobs. Not as an institutional formulation. Personally." She looked at him, weighing the cost and worth of his apology. She decided to receive it as offered. "Thank you," she said. "Now make it mean something."
Dr. Mark Ellison was placed on administrative leave pending review on the afternoon of the second day. He was home, in the purgatory of a man who knows something is coming. He replayed the 12 seconds he'd spent at Naomi's gurney trying to identify the exact mechanism by which he decided she could wait. He'd told himself it was the vitals, the patient volume, but these excuses deflated. He had looked at a black woman in a cut-up Henley with a farmer's market bag and made a calculation that nearly cost her her life. So quickly, so naturally, he hadn't registered it as a calculation. He wasn't a monster. He'd spent 44 years certain he wasn't. He was beginning to understand this certainty wasn't exonerating, it was indicting. The formal investigation lasted 6 weeks, finding what Naomi said it would, a pattern. Not dramatic individual incidents, but a pattern, visible in the aggregate data, in the gap between time to imaging for patients of different demographics with similar complaints, a gap that had been there for years, unexamined. Dr. Ellison was suspended without pay for 90 days, required to complete bias training. Whether he emerged changed was a question for the future. Whether the hospital had protected its own, whether the investigation was thorough, these questions were asked in public forums and boardrooms.
Simone Reyes received a formal commendation and a handwritten note from Naomi, which she would keep in the back pocket of her first attending physician's white coat. It read, "What you did was medicine at its most fundamental. You saw a patient and you fought for her. Don't ever stop. Dr. N. Jacobs." The triage bias reduction protocol Naomi had been pushing for 18 months was implemented at Hargrove within 60 days of her return. She presented it herself on her first week back, her left arm still in a splint. She also received a formal letter from a healthcare equity organization asking her to testify before a state legislative committee examining triage disparities. She wrote back the same day. "Yes," she said. "Tell me when." 5 months later, on a Saturday in March, the kitchen light was the same, low and golden, a deliberate gift. Naomi stood at the window in different socks and the same Howard University sweatshirt, which she'd replaced after the original was cut away. Her arm was healed. A small scar at her left temple, a thin seam, was now part of her permanent landscape. She was giving a keynote at the National Conference on Emergency Medicine Ethics in 2 weeks, a speech titled "The Wrong Patient." The title had 2 meanings. She was a patient who should not have been treated that way, and every patient treated that way was the wrong patient, because no patient should be treated that way. The distinction needed stating because it wasn't yet obvious enough to be assumed. She was going to say, "I survived, not because I was chief of trauma surgery. I survived because a 29-year-old resident trusted what she saw over what she was told, and because sometimes one person is enough, but sometimes is not a standard, sometimes is not a system. We need to build institutions that don't require a single brave person to catch what the institution is missing." She was going to say, "The question I keep being asked is, how does it feel to be on the other side? And my answer is, It feels exactly like what I've been telling you for 20 years that it feels like for patients who don't have my title. It feels like being invisible. It feels like being a category rather than a person. It feels like being worth less. She was going to say, nothing about my experience was extraordinary. That is the most important thing I can tell you. It was ordinary. It happens every day. The only thing extraordinary is that I was able to come back and tell you about it.
She thought about Simone Reyes, now applying for an emergency medicine fellowship, and the note she sent her, hoping it conveyed recognition between equals. She thought about her mother, who came from Baltimore and sat with her through recovery, holding her hand. Her phone started at 7:04, a third-year resident, apologetic with a complex polytrauma incoming. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. She put down the coffee. She changed into her scrubs, clipped her ID badge to her lanyard, her name, her title, the blue and grey Hargrove Memorial colors, tucking it under her collar. She drove a different car now, a red Subaru. The blue Volvo was gone, and she needed something new that didn't carry the shape of an October Saturday. She drove through the early spring streets, the light low, trees furred with green. She thought, every person who comes through those doors is someone's whole world. Every person. Act accordingly. She parked, she walked through the ambulance bay, through the automatic doors that had opened for her hundreds of times. She was home in the way a person who has chosen a vocation is always home when the work begins. The smell of antiseptic, industrial cleaner, and beneath it, the iron-tinged smell of medicine as it was actually practiced. The sounds, monitors, footsteps, a code team call, a child crying, then soothed. She put on her badge. She walked toward the sound of the work. She did not need them to know who she was. She knew who she was. That had always been enough. That had to be enough for all of them.
This powerful story, The Wrong Patient by Anna, reminds us that the experiences it depicts, though fictional in this specific case, reflect very real disparities in emergency care, particularly concerning implicit bias in triage decisions. If this episode resonated with you, consider sharing it.